Welcome to another edition of Joe's Politics 101. Today my subject is going to be about the Republican Party. And it's entitled, Who Makes Up the Republican Party? And you know, we got so many people involved in the Republican Party with this Tea Party thing and the opposition to so much, the destroying of programs or services that people feel should be a part of American life on a day-to-day basis. We have all these individuals with these Spanish surnames involved in it. You know, it's funny how people who come to America or be born in America in one of the so-called minority races, and all of a sudden they're assimilated into white society. You know, they become Caucasian, or their behavior or attitude becomes Caucasian. You know, I don't think a lot of that is involving the right or the wrong or anything. I think a lot of it just involves money. So I would like to know, and you know, this is my opinion basically of who makes up the Republican Party, because you can judge people's attitude by their behavior. And my having been for the last 4 or 5 years observing elected congressional Republican politicians' behavior, I get the impression that the Republican Party's goal is to dictate absolute control over the United States government by putting into place laws and policies designed to exclude certain segments of society and force American citizens to live by laws that are detrimental to the American dream. You know, as a voter and, you know, an observer of some of the voting habits of people, I've noticed that Americans tend to make political judgments or support candidates based on ideas centered around religion, race, class, and popularity. In most cases, they don't look into or fully understand the ideology behind the candidate's rhetoric. The Republican Party of today, you know, and you know, it's a lot of discussion about this and debate about this, who are the Republicans. But the Republican Party of today emerged because of the 1960 election of President John F. Kennedy and his support for civil rights, the civil rights movement of the 60s. White Southern Democrats, formerly known or used to be referred to as Dixiecrats, left the Democratic Party because they did not want a Catholic, for number one, and they did not like the idea of having a civil rights bill come to the floor as proposed by President Kennedy. You know, they wanted things to stay the same way. They needed Jim Crow, segregation, and all of that stuff. Southern Democrats, or Dixiecrats if you want to call them that, entered the Republican Party, and they brought with them Southern white values of stereotyping, prejudices, and racist behavior associated with Southern Democratic political policies. As an Afro-American who grew up during the Jim Crow and Civil Rights era, I understand race relations. Having taught race relations education in the military, I closely follow events of today and have the ability to recognize and you know, covert racism, verbal behavior of elected Republican congressional representatives and their supporters. I'm not saying racism is exclusive to Southern states or Republicans. However, their rhetoric is laden with extremist quotes and racist stereotyping. Jim Crow laws were state laws practiced throughout the United States of America. Most of today's Republicans, politicians, have been in Congress for 20 or more years and have made lucrative careers out of developing legislation and policies designed to benefit themselves, large corporations, and wealthy individuals. Most Republicans defend policies that exclude or lessen the ability of low-income, middle-income, and minority Americans from realizing the American dream. While they skim and pocket money from corporations and wealthy people with special requests, in addition, they support policies that allow them to make money off the stock market, insider trading, by passing laws to subsidize corporations with government funds, corporations they know will make money, which they invest in to make money for themselves, because they know that the investments will return a profit because of the government subsidies. It is reasonable to assume that politicians who represent the right-wing fringes of American politics want to exclude minorities from mainstream America based on race, religion, gender, or origin. It is a message Republican politicians have been sending for years, dating back to Ronald Reagan's presidency. They have ratcheted up their efforts since Barack Obama became president. The Republican Party talking points are full of white supremacist ideology and rhetoric. Statements like, "Take our country back," "less laws and more justice." Phrases like those come straight from white extremist groups, neo-Nazis, and Ku Klux Klan speeches. I read in a book some years ago when a white supremacist, Harold Covington, made a statement about conservatives and Republicans. He said, "There are many Nazis in the Republican Party, and most conservatives are closet Nazis." Watching and listening to Republican politicians and potential presidential candidates make extreme statements lead me to believe his statements are true. If you study the history of politics in the United States and the number of political parties our nation has seen in its 38 years of existence, will surprise you. The Whigs, the Know-Nothing, Libertarians, Independents, Democrats, Republican, and the Republican Party. You have to wonder how in the hell did the Democrat and Republican Party survive all these years. My theory is they survived because Americans believe that a reasonable two-party system is best for our nation. It eliminates confusion and gives voters a better chance of understanding the issues. Once upon a time, the Republican Party was the party of Afro-American and white people under Republican President Abraham Lincoln, who fought a civil war with southern states to keep our nation united and promote freedom for all by ending slavery. Dwight D. Eisenhower was the last Republican president to embrace the ideology of social equality. The old Democratic Party, the Dixiecrats, was made up of white southern plantation owners and slave owners. Their desire for free and cheap labor provided by slaves and sharecropping outweighed their belief in freedom and justice for all. The core value of the United States of America is freedom, liberty, and justice, and the pursuit of happiness for all who live within its borders. In 1960, when John Fitzgerald Kennedy ran for President of the United States, Afro-Americans who were able to vote shifted their vote to the Democratic Party because they saw in Kennedy's message the possibility he would end the practice of Jim Crow laws. White Southern, Midwestern, Northern, Northwestern politicians moved to the Republican Party because they could not vision a Catholic as President of the United States, or the idea that Jim Crow laws would be gone. The Republican Party you see today is the offspring of the old Southern and Midwestern white Democratic Party. Today's Republican Party has all the values associated with the Dixiecrats: race, religion, class, and exclusionary policies. The Republican Party of today is also struggling with the reality of an Afro-American as President of the United States. The idea of the federal government not having a role in regulating individual states' behavior is self-serving for national and state-level politicians. Giving people in power absolute control over the lives of citizens of a state will never work, because many harbor racist and discerning behavior that would exclude some segments of society. If my memory and history serves me right, up until the 1960s, 48 states were in charge of their laws, policies, and destinies. Jim Crow laws and voters' rights were strictly state laws. Jim Crow policies excluded minorities, specifically Afro-Americans, denying them freedom of movement, freedom of speech, education, opportunity, and the right to vote throughout the United States. If it were not for the federal government's intervention, the United States of America would still have Jim Crow laws, white and black signs signaling segregated restrooms, cafes, and schools. America has come a long way in the area of social equality since the end of Jim Crow. Legislation ending Jim Crow, integrated schools, and places to eat was all good because it expanded democratic principles and social equality in America, past and present. Republican politicians and their supporters have always opposed democratic policies of social equality. They cling to stereotypes of Afro-American and other minorities who are not white like them. They believe the color of a person's skin make them inferior to white Americans, or in some strange way threatens their existence. This belief comes from what they learned from parents, relatives, and people in their communities. In addition, it is something white Americans are teaching their children today. I'm sure you have heard Republicans touting the United States Constitution. Their interpretation of the U.S. Constitution amused me. They are selective when they talk about the Constitution. You seldom hear them talk about the Bill of Rights, the documents describing Americans' original concept of civil rights, and has led to constitutional amendments giving Afro-Americans and women their right as citizens of the United States of America. It is shameful that in 2012 and 13, Republicans are overtly targeting Afro-Americans, women, and other minorities and social programs. However, their policies will also affect low and middle income white Americans. Republicans want to turn back the hands of time by making it harder for minorities, poor whites, and elderly people to vote, eliminating public education and workers' rights. Americans are not aware that minority, poor, white, and middle-class Americans make up the majority of the public sector workforce. Armed service members, school teachers, firefighters, police officers, public works, and other municipal, state, and federal jobs. The reason public sector workers are minorities, middle class, and poor white Americans is because private sector employers, corporations, and small businesses discriminate against minorities and less educated Americans. You can't hide race, sex, or education. When you hear people in the Republican Party talk about other races, sex, sexual orientation, marriage, and religion, they are expressing their prejudices on those issues. If they are in power, they are able to expand on their prejudices. They will attempt to repeal laws that have made America what it is today. Since the 1980s, the Republican Party has done a good job of controlling the economy, growth of low and middle income Americans. Ronald Reagan's theory of trickle-down economics was a disaster for low and middle income Americans. Ronald Reagan changed the tax code to benefit corporations and wealthy Americans. He closed tax loopholes that benefited low and middle income Americans, leaving them with one write-off if they own their home. Closing those loopholes took revenue from the federal government because low and middle income workers make purchases with the money they receive from their income tax returns, whereas rich Americans and corporations save or reinvest what they receive from the income tax return. In addition, Ronald Reagan cut funding or eliminated programs put in place by Democratic presidents that were designated to provide low and middle income Americans job training. Programs like the Job Corps, Peace Corps, and the on-the-job training subsidies to companies who train workers to work in their businesses. Those programs was essential to poor and middle-class Americans who did not finish high school, join the military, or attend college. The idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstrap in search of the American dream sounds good to some people who make that statement. I have learned from trying to pull myself up by my bootstraps, it's impossible. Business and corporations pay workers as little as possible, which is normally just enough to make ends meet. Prices of goods and commodities continue to go up, and wages don't keep pace with the increase in the cost of living. Generally speaking, most working class Americans live from paycheck to paycheck, struggling to put food on their table and pay bills, purchase fuel for transportation back and forth to work, which leave them little to save. The radical Republicans of 2012 and 2013 are trying to create a more divided country than we already are. They want to take their country back. What is the underlying meaning of that statement? And why do Republicans and their supporters keep repeating that phrase? The country looks as though it is in the same place it was in my lifetime. The Republican Party consists of white conservatives, neoconservatives, evangelical Christians. The names are different, but their message are the same. If you are not like me, you are not welcome in mainstream America. Why would a politician sign a pledge never to raise taxes under any circumstances, as long as they do not have to raise taxes on corporations, millionaires, and billionaires, which is their focus? They are willing to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid programs that benefit senior citizens, poor, low